Part 1. World Beyond the Poles. There's a map in the United Nations logo that shows something impossible. The continents are arranged in a circle, surrounded by ice, with nothing beyond. Been there since 1945, hiding in plain sight, and it might be telling us the truth about our world. Admiral Richard Byrd flew over the North Pole in 1947. What he reported next would be classified for decades. In his journal, he described flying over mountains, forests, and rivers where there should only be ice. He saw animals that shouldn't exist in the Arctic, and he claimed to have traveled 1,700 miles beyond the pole into a land that doesn't appear on any map. The official record says he was confused, that he miscalculated, that the extreme conditions played tricks on his mind. But Byrd was one of the most accomplished polar explorers in history. He'd made multiple expeditions to both poles. He knew ice when he saw it, and what he saw wasn't ice. His diary entry from February 19th reads like science fiction. Green valleys, a mammoth-like creature grazing near a forest, a temperature gauge showing 45 degrees. This is a man who'd spent years in polar regions, who understood the environment better than almost anyone alive. Yet he's describing a tropical paradise where there should be nothing but frozen wasteland. The military debriefed him for 6 hours. Then they classified the entire expedition. When reporters asked questions, they were told national security prevented disclosure. Byrd himself would only say that there were lands beyond the poles more important to explore than space itself. Then he stopped talking about it altogether. Here's what makes this stranger. Byrd wasn't the only one who reported anomalies beyond the poles. Norwegian explorer Olaf Jansen claimed in 1908 that he and his father had sailed through an opening in the Arctic ice and discovered an entire civilization living inside the Earth. His account was dismissed as the ravings of a madman. But the details in his story match elements of Byrd's report almost exactly. Different explorers, different time periods, same impossible descriptions. The standard explanation is that these men suffered from polar madness. That isolation and extreme cold created hallucinations. That their minds invented warm lands and green forests because they desperately needed relief from the endless ice. It's a convenient explanation. It's also lazy, because if you dig deeper, you find something else. You find centuries of maps showing additional continents beyond the ice. You find ancient texts describing lands in the far north that never see night during summer. You find mathematical calculations suggesting Earth's geometry doesn't quite match what we're taught. The Mercator map of 1569 shows 4 massive islands around the North Pole, separated by channels. Mercator was the most renowned cartographer of his era. He didn't invent these islands. He copied them from older sources. Sources that supposedly showed the Arctic as it appeared before it was covered in ice. How would ancient map makers know what the Arctic looked like without ice? The Piri Reis map from 1513 shows the coastline of Antarctica in accurate detail. It was created centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered, and it shows the continent without ice, revealing mountain ranges and rivers that we only confirmed existed in the 1950s using ground-penetrating radar. The official explanation is that Piri Reis somehow guessed correctly, that he drew an incredibly accurate map of a continent he'd never seen, showing features that were hidden under miles of ice, purely by accident. That explanation requires more faith than the alternative. Something else appears on these old maps. They show passages through the Arctic ice, openings that lead somewhere. The cartographers marked these passages with notes suggesting they led to other lands. Not just ice, lands, Modern satellite imagery doesn't show these passages. The poles are heavily pixelated in publicly available satellite photos. NASA claims this is due to orbital patterns, making direct overhead shots difficult. But private researchers have noted that the pixelation seems deliberately applied, as if something is being obscured. You can test this yourself. Pull up Google Earth, navigate to either pole. Watch how the image quality degrades the closer you get to the exact polar point. Then notice how the view suddenly becomes restricted, forcing you to view the area at angles rather than straight down. Why would the most photographed planet in human history have blind spots at the two most significant geographical locations? Military flights over the poles follow specific corridors. Commercial airlines don't fly over the poles, despite it being the shortest route for many international flights. The official reason is magnetic interference with navigation equipment. But modern planes have backup systems specifically designed to handle such interference. And private pilots who've requested permission to fly over the poles are denied without explanation. There are no fly zones over empty ice. Treaties restrict who can travel to Antarctica and where they can go. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 prohibits military activity, mineral mining, and nuclear testing. It also restricts independent exploration. You can visit Antarctica, but only through approved tour operators who take you to approved locations. The rest of the continent remains off limits. It's the only continent on Earth where you cannot freely explore. The stated reason is environmental protection. But Antarctica is massive. It's larger than Europe, yet the restrictions apply to the entire continent, not just sensitive ecological areas. And the penalties for violating these restrictions are severe. Ships that stray into prohibited zones are intercepted by military vessels. Researchers who discuss certain findings face funding cuts and career consequences. What exactly are they protecting? Admiral Byrd's final interview before his death suggested he knew. He spoke carefully, choosing words that wouldn't violate his military oaths. He said the future of humanity depended on what lay beyond the poles. He said there were resources there that could change civilization. And he said powerful forces were determined to keep it secret. 3 months later, he was dead. The official cause was heart failure. He was 68 and had lived a stressful life. Nothing suspicious about a man that age dying of heart problems, except that he'd just passed a complete physical examination, except that he'd been planning another polar expedition, except that his private notes and photos from his 1947 flight disappeared from his estate after his death. His son, Richard Byrd Jr., tried to organize an expedition to retrace his father's route. Permission was denied. He tried again in 1956, denied again. He spent decades attempting to access his father's classified expedition records through Freedom of Information requests. Every request was rejected on national security grounds. What national security threat could possibly exist in flying over ice? Unless it's not just ice. Unless there's something beyond the poles that changes everything we think we know about our world. Unless Admiral Byrd was telling the truth, and his testimony was suppressed because the implications were too significant to reveal. The evidence doesn't prove anything conclusively, but it raises questions that deserve answers. Questions about why the poles are restricted, why old maps show lands that aren't supposed to exist, why explorers reported seeing impossible things, why their accounts were classified or dismissed, and why, if there's really nothing beyond the poles except ice, so much effort is spent keeping people away from it. The physical evidence starts with something most people have never questioned. Why do compasses fail near the poles? The standard explanation involves magnetic field lines converging at the magnetic poles, creating interference. This is true, but it doesn't explain everything. Compasses don't just become unreliable near the poles. They behave erratically. They spin. They point in directions that make no sense based on our understanding of Earth's magnetic field. In 1996, a scientific expedition to the North Pole documented compass behavior that contradicted established models. Their instruments showed magnetic readings that suggested the pole was moving, not drifting slowly over decades, as magnetic poles are known to do, moving rapidly, shifting position by miles within hours. The data was reviewed by geophysicists who confirmed the instruments were functioning correctly. The readings were accurate, but they made no sense. Magnetic poles don't behave that way. Unless something beneath the ice is generating its own magnetic field, something that moves. The expedition's findings were published in an obscure scientific journal. Then the journal lost its funding. The lead researcher retired early, and nobody followed up on the anomalous readings. This wasn't the first time polar magnetic anomalies were documented and ignored. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarines conducted extensive mapping operations beneath the Arctic ice. They were ostensibly searching for strategic positions and underwater terrain. But their sonar readings picked up something else. Objects on the ocean floor that shouldn't exist. Structures. Geometric patterns in areas where natural formations don't occur. A Soviet submarine captain who defected in 1986 brought documents with him. Sonar images showing what appeared to be artificial constructions beneath the ice. Massive foundations. Walls extending for miles. All at depths that would require technology far beyond what any nation possessed. The CIA classified the documents. The captain was debriefed and placed in witness protection, and the sonar images were never released to the public. But other submarine crews from different nations reported similar findings. British, French, Canadian. All saw things beneath the polar ice that couldn't be explained. All were told to forget what they'd seen. Then there's the matter of the ice itself. Antarctica's ice sheet is up to 3 miles thick in places. That ice has been accumulating for millions of years, which means anything beneath it has been buried for at least that long, except in 1949 researchers found something impossible in an ice core sample, plant material. Specifically pollen from tropical plants, at depths that corresponded to time frames when Antarctica should have been frozen solid. The discovery suggested Antarctica was once warm enough to support tropical vegetation. This wasn't entirely surprising. Continental drift theory explains that Antarctica was positioned differently millions of years ago. What was surprising was the age of the samples. The pollen dated to roughly 12,000 years ago, not millions. 12,000. That's well within human history. That's after the last ice age was already established. Antarctica should have been frozen then. Yet somehow, tropical plants were growing there. More ice cores were taken. More samples revealed the same impossible timeline. Temperate climate vegetation in Antarctic ice, from periods when the continent should have been uninhabitable. The research was published, debated, then quietly shelved. The explanation offered was contamination. The samples must have been compromised. Never mind that the contamination would have had to occur in multiple independent samples from different locations, all showing the same impossible dates. And nobody explained where the contamination would have come from. You can't contaminate ice with pollen that doesn't exist in your environment. The plants that produce that pollen don't grow anywhere near Antarctica today. They don't grow in any cold climate. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Was Antarctica warm 12,000 years ago? And if so, why isn't that considered one of the most significant discoveries in climate science? Unless the implications are too problematic. Because if Antarctica was temperate that recently, someone could have been living there, building there, establishing civilization there before the ice returned. And if that's true, where did they go when the ice came back? Russian scientists drilling at Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake buried beneath 2 miles of Antarctic ice, found something in 2012. They'd been drilling for years, slowly penetrating the ice to reach water that hadn't been exposed to the surface in millions of years. The goal was to study ancient microbial life. What they found wasn't ancient microbes, at least not only that. They found water that was too warm. The lake, despite being buried under miles of ice in one of the coldest places on Earth, maintained a temperature of around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Geothermal activity, they said, heat from Earth's core, warming the water. Except Lake Vostok is far from any volcanic activity, and the amount of heat required to keep that much water at that temperature, beneath that much ice, exceeds what geothermal sources should provide. Something else is heating the lake, something generating consistent warmth beneath the ice. The Russian team also detected magnetic anomalies near the lake, strong ones, similar to what submarines had reported decades earlier, as if something metallic and massive was nearby. Then communications from the research station stopped. For 6 days, no contact. When communications resumed, the team reported equipment failures. They said the drill had encountered unexpected resistance, and they were suspending operations. They sealed the borehole and left. The station remained staffed, but all drilling operations at Lake Vostok ceased. The data they'd collected was classified by the Russian government, and when questioned about what they'd found, team members gave vague answers about contamination concerns. Nobody drills for years through 2 miles of ice, reaches their target, then immediately stops because of equipment failure. Not without a reason they're not sharing. Whatever they found at Lake Vostok, it wasn't what they expected, and it was significant enough to halt the entire operation. There's a pattern in how these discoveries get handled. Something gets found, something that doesn't fit. Initial excitement from researchers, papers get written, then senior officials get involved. Suddenly there are contamination concerns, equipment failures, security protocols. The discovery gets reclassified, buried in bureaucracy, or explained away with increasingly tortured logic that somehow satisfies no one, yet ends all discussion. It happened with Lake Vostok. It happened with the Peary race map. It's happening with something else right now. In 2002, a team scanning the ocean floor off the coast of Cuba detected geometric patterns at an impossible depth. Sonar readings showed what appeared to be structures, symmetrical formations, right angles. Nothing natural produces right angles at that scale underwater. The formation sat at 2,200 feet, too deep for ancient human construction. According to conventional timelines, humans weren't building cities that could sink to those depths 12,000 years ago. They weren't building much of anything, except the sonar images showed city block patterns, pyramid shapes, structures arranged in geometric precision across an area the size of several football fields. Advanced Sonar Inc., the company that made the discovery, brought in National Geographic. They brought in archaeologists. A submarine was deployed to get visual confirmation. The submarine captured footage, blocks of white stone, each measuring several meters across. Granite, cut granite, arranged in patterns. Some footage appeared to show carved symbols on the stone surfaces, though the depth and sediment made detailed analysis difficult. Then something strange happened with the funding. The exploration was expensive, requiring specialized equipment and repeated dives. Initial funding came through. Plans were made for a comprehensive survey of the site. Documentation was supposed to follow. It never did. The project lost funding. Partners backed out. Advanced Sonar Incorporated tried continuing independently, but couldn't sustain the cost. The site remains largely unexplored. The footage exists, but follow-up investigation stopped. When pressed, officials cited the depth as prohibitive, too expensive to explore thoroughly. Except we've sent equipment deeper for less compelling reasons. The Titanic sits at a similar depth and has been extensively documented. Oil companies drill at greater depths regularly. The Cuban government showed initial interest, then declined to pursue further exploration, which is odd, considering a genuine ancient city off their coast would be the archaeological discovery of the century. Tourism alone would justify the investment, unless they were told not to look. Because here's what nobody wants to acknowledge. If there are structures at that depth off Cuba, they either sank recently, which is geologically impossible, or they were built when sea levels were lower, much lower, which means they're at least 12,000 years old, dating to the end of the last ice age when glacial melt was raising ocean levels worldwide. And if humans were building geometric stone cities 12,000 years ago, every textbook is wrong. Every timeline is wrong. The entire narrative of human development collapses. So the discovery gets shelved. Funding disappears. The story fades from discussion. But the structures are still down there. The sonar doesn't lie. The footage exists. In 1995, a diver named Kihachiro Aratake discovered something off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan. Massive stone structures underwater. Terraces, steps, pillars, all carved from solid bedrock. The formations stretch for hundreds of meters, featuring precise right angles and flat surfaces. Geologists arrived to investigate. Some insisted the formations were natural, created by erosion and tectonic activity. Others pointed out the tool marks, the post holes, the carved channels that appear designed for water flow, the stone tablets with symbols. One researcher, Masaki Kimura, spent years studying the site. He documented evidence of human modification everywhere: corner joints, drainage systems, a carved face partially buried in sediment, steps too uniform to be natural fractures. The counter-argument relied on one claim: the structures were too old. If they were man-made, they'd have to date to when sea levels were lower. That puts them at 10 to 12,000 years old minimum. Humans in that region weren't supposed to be doing advanced stonework then. So despite the evidence, despite the obvious signs of construction, the formations were declared natural. Problem solved. No need to rewrite history, except more divers kept finding more evidence, more right angles, more terraces, more signs of deliberate construction. The site became a tourist attraction for divers, all of whom could see what geologists kept insisting wasn't there. And here's the thing about water: it preserves. Stone underwater doesn't erode the way surface stone does. If these structures are artificial, they should show clear signs of construction, and they do. The debate isn't really about whether they're man-made. It's about whether we're allowed to accept what that means. Because accepting it means humans were building monumental architecture thousands of years before we were supposed to be capable of it, in multiple locations worldwide, at a time when those locations were above water, before the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, which connects back to Antarctica, to Graham Hancock's theory, to everything that keeps getting dismissed without proper investigation. If there was a civilization before ours, they'd have built on coastlines, Everyone does. Coastal access means trade, food, transportation. And if that civilization was destroyed by rising sea levels at the end of the Ice Age, their cities would now be underwater. We'd find them off coasts worldwide, exactly where we keep finding them. Cuba, Japan, India has similar formations off the Gujarat coast, structures underwater off the Bahamas, off the coast of England, all at depths consistent with Ice Age sea levels, all showing signs of human construction, all dismissed because accepting them rewrites everything. The evidence keeps mounting. The explanations keep failing. And still, no comprehensive exploration happens. No major funding appears. The discoveries fade from discussion. It's almost like someone doesn't want us looking. The pattern extends beyond structures. It shows up in genetics, too. In 2008, a team of geneticists published findings about a haplogroup called X. It's a mitochondrial DNA lineage that appears in very specific populations: Native Americans along the East Coast, parts of Europe, the Middle East, nowhere in between. That distribution makes no sense under current migration models. If Native Americans crossed the Bering Strait from Asia, they shouldn't carry a European genetic marker. If Europeans arrived by boat much later, the DNA should show more recent introduction. Instead, haplogroup X appears ancient in both populations, dating to roughly the same period, before the Ice Age ended. The only explanation that fits the data, a common source population that predates both groups, one that was geographically positioned to contribute DNA to populations on both sides of the Atlantic before rising sea levels separated them. A civilization that existed when sea levels were lower, when land masses extended further, when crossing the Atlantic was easier because the distance was shorter. But suggesting that means suggesting advanced maritime capability 15,000 years ago, which contradicts every model of human development. So the genetic evidence gets explained away through increasingly complex migration theories that require multiple coincidences to work. Similar patterns show up in language. Linguists have identified root words that appear in languages separated by oceans, words for boat, water, sun, and star, that share phonetic similarities across cultures that supposedly never had contact. The similarities are too consistent to be coincidence, too specific to be parallel development. One researcher, Barry Fell, documented hundreds of these linguistic connections. He found Mediterranean scripts in North America, Ogham writing in New England, Phoenician inscriptions in Iowa. Each discovery was dismissed by mainstream archaeology, called fraudulent without proper investigation. His work was ridiculed in academic circles, his findings ignored, yet the inscriptions remain, carved into stone, weathered by centuries of exposure, dismissed not because they're fake, but because they're inconvenient. The same thing happened with cocaine and tobacco found in Egyptian mummies. Both plants are native only to the Americas. Neither should exist in pre-Columbian Egypt. When German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova tested mummy tissue in 1992, she found significant traces of both substances. Multiple mummies. Consistent results. The response wasn't investigation. It was dismissal. Critics claimed contamination, modern fraud, anything except the obvious explanation. Ancient Egyptians had access to New World plants, which means either they traveled there or someone brought the plants to them. Both options require transoceanic contact thousands of years before Columbus. Rather than explore this possibility, museums restricted access to mummy samples. Further testing became nearly impossible. The discovery disappeared from mainstream discussion. Problem solved through silence. This pattern repeats everywhere, Evidence appears, gets dismissed, access gets restricted, discussion fades. It's systematic, almost coordinated. Consider the Smithsonian Institution. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, newspapers across America reported discoveries of giant skeletons, 7 feet tall, 8 feet. Some reports claimed 9 feet or more, hundreds of accounts, different locations, consistent descriptions. Many excavations were conducted by or reported to the Smithsonian. None of those skeletons exist in their collections today. When researchers request access, they're told no records exist. The bones have vanished, not lost, not misplaced, gone, as if they never existed despite extensive documentation of their discovery. The Smithsonian claims the newspapers exaggerated, that the reports were hoaxes, that no such skeletons were ever in their possession. But the documentation exists: letters, expedition records, published reports from their own scientists describing the finds. The skeletons disappeared. The records disappeared. And questioning this disappearance labels you a conspiracy theorist. But here's what makes it interesting. Native American oral traditions describe giants across multiple tribes, different regions, consistent stories about red-haired giants who were eventually wiped out through warfare. The Paiute tribe in Nevada tells of the Seetaka, giants who lived in caves. When settlers excavated Lovelock Cave in 1911, they found red-haired mummies over 7 feet tall, exactly where the legend said they'd be. Those mummies disappeared too. Some remain in storage, inaccessible to researchers. Others vanished entirely. The official story changed from "we found giants" to "the reports were exaggerated," to "nothing unusual was ever found." You see the pattern. Physical evidence appears, gets documented, then disappears or becomes restricted, while the official narrative shifts to deny the evidence ever existed. This isn't about proof anymore. This is about access, about what we're allowed to examine, about which questions we're permitted to ask. Every mystery we've covered has this same structure. Evidence exists. Investigation is blocked or dismissed. Alternative explanations get no funding. Researchers who persist get marginalized. The conversation gets shut down not through evidence, but through institutional pressure. Why does a pyramid in Bosnia threaten anyone? Why can't we properly explore underwater structures? Why are ancient genetic anomalies explained through increasingly complex theories instead of simple ones? What are we not supposed to find? More importantly, who decided we shouldn't look? Because someone did. These aren't random occurrences. This is pattern. This is policy. And it's been consistent for over a century. The evidence suggests we're not the first. That civilizations rose before us, built monuments, crossed oceans, developed technologies we're only now rediscovering. Then something happened. The Ice Age ended. Sea levels rose. Coastal cities drowned. Knowledge was lost. Survivors scattered. And humanity started over. That's the story the evidence tells, if we're allowed to examine it. But we're not. Not really. We get fragments, glimpses, enough to know something's there, never enough to see the complete picture. Which brings us to the final question, the one nobody wants to ask. If someone's been hiding this history, keeping us from understanding our true past, what else are they hiding? And what happens when we finally find it? The answer isn't comfortable. Because if history's been controlled, if evidence has been systematically removed or restricted, then our understanding of reality itself might be curated. Not discovered, curated. Think about what that means. Every history book you read in school, every documentary you watched, every museum exhibit you walk through, all of it filtered through institutions that have demonstrated they'll remove evidence that contradicts their narrative. Not sometimes, consistently, for over a century. The implications cascade outward. If ancient civilizations were more advanced than we're told, what else did they know? What technologies did they possess? What understanding of the cosmos, of consciousness, of human potential existed before the reset? We're told humanity progressed linearly, from caves to agriculture to cities to technology. A steady climb upward. But the evidence suggests cycles, rises and falls, civilizations that peaked, then collapsed, knowledge gained, then lost, over and over. The Younger Dryas impact theory explains the mechanism. 12,800 years ago, something massive struck the ice sheets, covering North America. The resulting floods, fires, and climate chaos would have destroyed any coastal civilization. And that's exactly when most ancient sites date to, right after the catastrophe, built by survivors who still possess knowledge from before. Those survivors tried to preserve what they knew, encoded it in stone, in myths, in monuments aligned to astronomical events that wouldn't occur for thousands of years. They knew future civilizations would eventually develop the technology to understand. They left a message. We're only now learning to read it. But someone doesn't want us reading it. The suppression isn't random. It's targeted, specifically toward evidence of advanced ancient civilizations, toward artifacts that suggest lost technologies, toward discoveries that would fundamentally alter our understanding of human history. Why? What's the threat? A civilization that existed 12,000 years ago can't possibly threaten anyone today, unless the threat isn't about the past. It's about what discovering that past would change about our present. If humanity achieved advanced civilization before, then we're not special. Our current technological age isn't unique. We're rediscovering, not discovering. That shift in perspective changes everything about how we see ourselves, about what we believe is possible, about who controls the narrative of human potential. Consider the gatekeepers: universities, museums, funding agencies, publishing houses. They all operate within a paradigm. Step outside it, and you lose funding, lose credibility, lose access. The system doesn't need a conspiracy, it needs conformity, and conformity is enforced through career consequences. Graham Hancock lost his platform on TED for questioning orthodox archaeology, not for being wrong, for asking questions that made institutions uncomfortable. That's how control works, not through suppression of information, but through suppression of inquiry. The researchers investigating these sites aren't cranks. They're using ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, satellite imaging, the same technologies that revealed lost cities in the Amazon and Cambodia. The technology works. The evidence exists. But when it contradicts the approved narrative, suddenly the technology is questioned. The methodology is questioned. The researchers themselves are questioned, never the paradigm. The paradigm is protected. But paradigms crack. The Bosnian pyramids kept being investigated despite opposition. Göbekli Tepe forced a rewrite of civilization's timeline. Underwater structures are being documented faster than they can be dismissed. The evidence accumulates, slowly, persistently. Each discovery makes the official story harder to maintain. Each piece of suppressed evidence that surfaces makes the suppression more obvious. The walls are cracking. What's behind them? Probably not aliens or Atlantean super technology. Probably something simpler. Evidence that humans were smarter, more capable, more advanced than we've been told. That knowledge was lost, not through primitive ignorance, but through catastrophe. That we're not climbing towards something new. We're climbing back towards something we once had. That realization changes the equation. If we did it before, we can do it again. If ancient civilizations achieved things we're only now rediscovering, then our current limitations aren't limitations at all. They're just gaps in knowledge, gaps that can be filled. The suppression makes sense now, not as conspiracy, but as institutional inertia. Academia built careers on one timeline. Museums built exhibits on one narrative. Textbooks taught one version. Changing it means admitting error, means rebuilding from scratch, means thousands of experts were wrong about fundamental assumptions. Nobody wants to be wrong on that scale. Easier to dismiss, ignore, restrict access. Let the next generation deal with it. Except the evidence keeps accumulating, the questions keep being asked, and the walls keep cracking. So what happens next? The evidence will continue emerging. Technology will continue improving our ability to find and analyze ancient sites. More researchers will ask uncomfortable questions. More discoveries will contradict official timelines. The cracks will widen. Eventually, the paradigm will shift, not through sudden revelation, but through accumulated weight. Enough anomalies pile up, and the old explanation collapses. New framework emerges. History gets rewritten again. Because it's been rewritten before. This isn't the first time institutions resisted evidence. Won't be the last. The pattern repeats. Evidence appears, gets dismissed, accumulates, eventually overwhelms resistance. Truth emerges. Not quickly, not cleanly, but eventually. We're in the middle of that process now. The dismissal phase is ending. The accumulation phase is accelerating. The emergence phase approaches. What we'll discover about our past will change how we understand our present. And that's exactly why. Some people don't want us looking, but we're looking anyway. The Bosnian pyramids are still being excavated. Göbekli Tepe is still revealing secrets. Underwater structures are still being mapped. Giant skeletons are still being documented, even if they keep disappearing. The work continues. The questions persist. The truth, whatever it is, gets closer. And when we finally see the complete picture of what came before, we'll understand what's possible ahead. That's worth searching for, even if someone wishes we wouldn't. Maybe that's the real reason for the secrecy. Not to hide what was, but to control what we might become. Because if we understood that humans built civilizations before, that we rose and fell and rose again, we'd realize something dangerous. We'd realize we're not fragile, we're not limited, we're not dependent on the systems that claim to protect us. We're resilient, capable. We've done this before, and we can do it again. With or without permission, with or without institutional approval. The knowledge exists, scattered across the globe in monuments and myths and maps that don't quite fit, buried under ice, submerged beneath waves, hidden in plain sight on the walls of ancient temples and the logos of modern institutions. The gatekeepers can restrict access to Antarctica. They can classify expedition reports. They can make researchers disappear from academic circles. They can remove evidence from museums and erase records from archives. But they can't stop the ice from melting. They can't prevent technology from advancing. They can't suppress every curious mind that looks at the evidence and asks why. The walls are already cracking. Each new discovery widens the fissures. Ground-penetrating radar doesn't care about paradigms. Satellite imagery doesn't respect institutional narratives. The truth emerges not because someone allows it, but because reality doesn't require permission. Admiral Byrd flew beyond the pole and saw something that changed him. He tried to tell us. They silenced him. But his words remain. His journal exists, and every year more people read it and wonder if he was telling the truth. Not because they want to believe in hidden lands or ancient civilizations, but because the official story has too many holes, too many contradictions, too many classified documents and restricted zones and disappeared researchers. The pattern is clear once you see it. Evidence appears. Investigation stops. Discussion ends. The cycle repeats. For over a century, the same institutions have controlled the same narrative, using the same methods, and we're supposed to believe it's all coincidence, all reasonable caution, all legitimate academic rigor. But rigor doesn't require secrecy. Science doesn't need restricted access. Truth doesn't fear investigation. Only lies require protection. Only false narratives need enforcement. Only constructed realities demand that certain questions never be asked. So ask them anyway. Look at the maps. Read the expedition reports. Examine the underwater structures. Study the genetic evidence. Follow the linguistic trails. Question why the poles are restricted. Question why ancient sites are dismissed. Question why researchers who challenge orthodoxy lose funding and credibility, while those who conform receive grants and tenure. Question everything, because that's what they don't want. They want acceptance, compliance, belief in the approved narrative. They want you to see the pixelated poles on Google Earth and not wonder why. They want you to hear about underwater cities and think natural formation. They want you to read about Admiral Byrd and conclude polar madness. They want you to stop looking, stop asking, stop thinking, because the moment you start genuinely investigating, the moment you examine the evidence without the filter of institutional gatekeeping, the moment you trust your own judgment over their narrative, everything changes. You see the cracks, you notice the patterns, you realize the story we've been told is incomplete at best and deliberately false at worst. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The evidence is everywhere. In ancient maps showing lands that shouldn't exist, in structures underwater dating to impossible ages, in genetic markers connecting populations that supposedly never met, in megalithic architecture built with precision we can barely replicate today, in myths describing advanced civilizations before recorded history, in classified documents and restricted zones and disappeared researchers. The truth is there, waiting, not beyond the poles, not in some hidden land, right here, in the evidence we're not supposed to examine, in the questions we're not supposed to ask, in the conclusions we're not supposed to reach. It's all there, scattered, fragmented, deliberately obscured, but accessible to anyone willing to look past the gatekeepers and investigate for themselves. The ice is melting. The secrets are surfacing, and no amount of institutional control can stop what's already begun. We're remembering what we forgot, discovering what was hidden, understanding what we were, and that understanding will determine what we become, not because someone allows it, but because reality doesn't need permission to be real. Truth doesn't need approval to be true. And humanity doesn't need institutional validation to remember who we really are.